Today we're going to be talking about shadow work. Thank you so much for joining the video. This is Professor Matt from Psycosmos. I appreciate each and every one of you. I love you guys so very much. Just a quick shout out. What is shadow work, right? It is the inner working, the inner integration of the darker parts of ourselves so that we can become balanced and whole and unified. If you're interested in learning more, I'm just going to do this quick call out now. I've got 59 members in my school, and I have lots of courses that I'm actually adding. So here, let me just show you real quick. I have relationship healing courses, but I'm also working on, dangers of spiritual psychosis and shadow work as courses in my school, my online university, Psycosmos University. Please go check that out. And if you're interested in working with my AI tool, I do one-on-one coaching sessions, but if you would prefer to talk with an AI tool, or if you're currently using ChatGPT or one of those other tools to discuss a lot of your personal problems, there's a couple problems with that. Number one, they're not engineered for that. My AI psychology tool is. And number two, it saves and houses all of your data, which mine does not. So your privacy is protected here with mine. And if you're interested, please go check that out. There are packages for this. So let's talk a little bit more about shadow work. That's the topic of today's discussion. And I appreciate each and every one of you watching. There's a video game that I played a number of years back. I'm actually, this game is coming up on about like 10 years old. It's called Persona 5. It's like an anime Japanese style video game where basically it's got a lot of metaphysics within it. I'm not going to get into it because I don't want to spoil it, but essentially you go around changing the psychology of people. That's a very broad statement of what it's about. This game grossed over $1 billion in sales over the years of like 2016 or so when it came out, the original version, all the way to like 2019, 2020. So within 5 years, this game was able to get $1 billion. Why? Because it plays upon the themes of spirituality. It plays upon the themes of psychology that are deeply rooted within us. Talks a lot about the personal and collective unconscious. There's a lot of psychology here with that. But really, if we're going to study shadow work, we have to understand things like the hero's journey, the cycles, right? Mitosis. I talk about all of these cycles all the time. And I will tell you before we dive really deep into this video, this is going to be a really great video on shadow work. It's going to talk about what shadow work is, the basics, and also how to, get through it. So if you have somebody, if you know anybody who's going through a tough time, maybe they need to watch something like this, please like the video, comment, share the video around, follow for more, share it with your friends. This is going to be really intuitive. So the hero's journey is our personal tale that we tell ourselves pretty much on every form or every regard of what it means to have a human existence. So what does that even mean? Physically, we go through this cycle. Mentally, we go through this cycle. Psychologically, emotionally, we go through this cycle. Spiritually, we go through this cycle. Each person is going through microcycles of basically this mapped out process. It's obviously not one-to-one. This is just Joseph Campbell's model, but the hero's journey, or the cycles of time, just the cycles themselves, are ones that we see coordinated and expressed in everything. And we see it in our mythology, we see it in our storytelling. But what shadow work is when we're in this initiation phase here towards the bottom. Generally speaking, and I'm just going to be very blunt, most people never get through the departure stage. Most people, and I don't really mean nowadays, but back in the day when I was younger, most people never really even left their hometown. A lot of people just stuck with wherever they grew up with. And they never really moved. They never got more experience. And that is part of the initiation phase. I think COVID itself, the pandemic, and just the current events geopolitically and everything else has caused people and forced people into this initiation phase, which is ironic because I feel as though a lot of people were kind of asking for this over the last 30 years of my life. That's kind of what I've experienced. People were desperately in need of drama and fighting and arguing, and there was always like some kind of underlying drama or issue when really everything was fine. But the human need for going into the depths of the darkness to conquer it and be the underdog is quite literally biologically built within us. Again, I reference mitosis. So with this, we have to understand a little bit of what shadow work is. And I've got some notes here, obviously. It's about unmasking your inner self. And what does that really mean? The shadow itself is a part of our psychology. And the shadow represents everything that we repress, deny, feel ashamed about, things that society tells us is not okay, instincts, impulses, memories, and emotions. We're actually seeing people's shadows being expressed and coming out now more than ever before. People are dressing the way they want to. They are acting the way that they want to in public. And I don't mean like in a innocent way, right? I'm talking about in a damaging way. People are acting exactly what they are pretending to be, essentially, in this goal and in this hope of trying to heal themselves, right? So there are tons of people that are now going out. Like a great example would be like thugs, right? Like gangsters of any group, you know, Italian mobsters or gangsters from Compton or anything like that. They dress a particular way. They're exuding their shadow out in the public. And like I mentioned, I'm talking really in like the last 30, 40 years, this has really dramatically increased, where people are, looking for fights. They're looking for altercations. And it's because they're repressing the inner world. And this is why you're seeing so many videos of like, I just saw some video of a woman who got set on fire or something. I didn't actually watch the video, but I saw that. I guess that's what happened. I think it was in Chicago or something. That's the shadow not being expressed properly, right? Or it's a psyop. It's one of the two. But I don't think that's the case in this particular example. So the shadow forms because of many reasons, most of which is through childhood, actually. And again, I'm going to showcase and discuss a lot of this stuff today. We're going to try to keep this video under 30 minutes, so I've got 23 minutes left. Society rewards conformity, trauma forces us to disassociate, and culture punishes authenticity, which is really well said. So the cost of suppression will basically lead your shadow to take over your ego. I've got some diagrams. I'll showcase to you what I mean. Let's start with the simple diagrams, right? A shadow is termed as the parts we try to hide, and shadow work helps us integrating with these negative sides and bringing them to the forefront. Don't self-pity, pay attention to your emotions, infuse compassion, identify the shadow, record your findings, pursue a hobby or a project. Very basic, right? Like this is, if you Google shadow work, this is what you're going to find. This doesn't help with people with dark triad traits, right? Which is really the people who need to do the shadow work the most. And if you're watching and you have some shadow work to do, that doesn't mean that you have dark triad traits. By the way, what are those? Machiavellian psychopathy and things like that. Sociopathy, right? Like if somebody is just freaking crazy, basically. They're not integrating their shadow properly. And a lot of us know these people. And unfortunately, the people who are on the worst end of the spectrum will never even bother to do stuff like this because I'm actually going to get into the neurology of that soon. But shadow work is extremely important. And they'll often say there's like 4 levels of shadow work, which honestly have to deal with the 4 stages of life or the 4 phases of the moon, or like very similar to how there were 3 phases here with the hero's journey. You just add a 4th phase. But shadow work really is, understanding shadow projection. So here's you, right? Here's you, who you think you are, and then versus your shadow self. She made another mistake. She is doing an awful job on this project. That may be what you say or what you think, but the darker part of you is saying, I don't think I'm doing a good job on this project. Right? Like, this is an outward expression, right? Someone else is just a mirror of our shadow. So if you're like in a position, I've seen this, I've worked in big style corporate, I worked on Wall Street, worked for big banks, stuff like that. This happens all the time in the corporate world. In fact, I have a quick story, person will completely remain anonymous. Basically, long story short, big company call, right? There's like 20 very important people on this call. I have a friend, he's on this call with his boss and a bunch of other people. He gets into not even an argument. He just gets into, a conversation about a certain topic with work, and they end the topic. The guy that he was having the conversation with, who's in the call, does not unmute his mic. Thought that his mic was muted because this is a remote call, and starts using really strong, visceral, negative language towards my friend. in which case the whole thing was recorded. And this is obviously a projection of the shadow. And I mean, he actually sent me a video of it because it was recorded, which again, that's kind of probably breaking some standards there, but whatever. Person's completely anonymous. And the funny thing about that whole situation was the guy started freaking out, calling him names, like to probably a coworker that was around him, but did not have his mic muted, and you could hear how angry he was in his tone, how negative, how visceral, how disgusting his tone was towards this other person. And it was honestly because of this. It was because he had made mistakes. So he was blaming the other person for pointing out his mistakes and saying, I hate that guy, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, that is exactly how this operates. And this is what happens when we have these negative ideas about ourselves, when we're proven wrong, etc. It was just exactly like what I showed with the Andrew Wilson guy yesterday. So go watch that video if you haven't. It's this guy got angry. He got confronted about something that he was hiding, probably. And his shadow came out, and he was just like, F you, blah, blah, blah. It's very negative. So again, the shadow work is excruciatingly important. And we have to ensure that we're doing it properly, or else all of our darkness gets projected outwardly of us. So there's awareness, root cause, and compassion, going to the origin of the problem, the integration of the dark parts into the light, and the embodiment. Now, let's talk a little bit deeper on a metaphysical level. There's that video game I was talking about. What really is shadow work? Okay, I just gave you the basic foundation. You got the first 10 minutes of the 30-minute video about the basics. Now we're getting into the meat and cheese. Deep within us, okay, we have a dark side and a light side. The light side is what we pretend to project to everybody, okay? That's not really who we are, all right? And this is why my videos are a little bit more edgy and I'm a little bit more crass than probably a lot of other people who are in this headspace. Love and light. Everything is so amazing. Understand the symbolism. Jesus wasn't a real person. It was all allegory, and I don't know what I'm talking about. It's this affront where they will... Their shadows are clearly not integrated because they have to keep up the persona that everything in their world is perfect. I will be the first to tell you that nobody's world is perfect, including my own. So if you came here thinking I'm going to watch Sacred Secretion Mastery and I'm going to, listen to this guy or whatever, I'm a normal dude. I don't perceive myself as any higher or lower than I already know that I am. And I'm just a guy. That's how I have to stop touching that. That's how I perceive myself, that I'm just a guy, and I am very grounded in that. I understand my mission, my purpose. I'm here to share a lot of this wonderful information. But at the end of the day, I am just a man, just like anybody else. And I am fallible and I'm, easy to make mistakes like anybody else. Nobody's ever perfect, right? And I know too many people who basically this is a quantum fluctuation, all right? We go from states of light to dark, light to dark, light to dark, because these are the opposites of the extremes. So you convince yourself that everything's great. You're going to go out, you lying to yourself through your own personal consciousness. And then you present the persona to everybody. But as soon as something negative happens, the shadow and the animus and anima come out. Now, for men and women specifically, their shadow side is an inversion of what they truly feel. So basically the shadow gets expressed as a reflection, and Carl Jung specifically said that reflection was often in the opposite sex. So when men specifically who don't have their shadow integrated have that provoked, they act very feminine, or at least what most people would consider feminine, in a negative sense, which would basically mean emotional outbursts, right? Which can cause physical violence, right? Which is often what happens. For women specifically, they get hyperlogical because the parts of their brain that are, working in fear mode get activated. And this is where, they get very logistical about how they want to plan and organize in order to sabotage, because normally the men will hit fast and hard, and then the women will play the long game, psychologically speaking, when people are operating in their shadow sense. Or here's the other part of it. If you're full of fear, your shadow is going to come out. So it's not even like you have to have dark triad traits. You could be a victim. But if you're a victim that is not willing to accept freeing yourself from the shackles of whatever situation you're in, your shadow is also going to come out too. You're going to see this when we talk about brain neurology in a second. Here's a more complicated perspective, right? You've got parts of your personality. You have the ego and the persona, which is, again, that light, right? It's the conscious element of what you think. So it's the conscious element of what you show everybody else. If you care enough, you might be able to activate this ego self axis, which is very similar to, again, let's take a look at the body, right? Here's your head, here's your body. And the shadow is actually, ironically, right? Like the personal unconscious is here around the throat. It's our conversations. It's the information that we share around each other. The personal, the persona and the ego is basically like that forward showing consciousness of what we're showcasing to everybody. And then we all have a shadow. We all have a darker side. And this is within the body, because the biggest factor that deals with shadow is cortisol. And I'm going to get into that in a second. It's cortisol. The biggest, in my opinion. Let's just put it that way. So you have the shadow, the soul image, and the personality. You have the collective unconscious, which is always tapped in and rooted within our being. It's always kind of controlling us to some degree. Then when you finally incorporate all aspects, you get into the true self. And of course, you've got different, modalities. This one's like, oh, the self is in the deepest core. This one's like the self is at the heart of it, at the middle. This one's the same thing. So here's the reality. If you become increasingly unconscious, you don't have a persona or ego. This is where people are like, oh, I performed ego death. Now, do you think that that's a good thing? Because if you perform ego death and you're constantly living in your unconscious, it basically means you've become too introverted. And this is actually where those dark triad traits can also form. I'm better than other people. I don't need to be around other people. I don't have to do things for other people. Other people just hurt me all the time and I don't want anything to do with them and blah, blah, blah. Balance is key. You have to have the conscious and the unconscious balanced in order to know your true self. Again, I would say cerebrum, cerebellum, inner thalamus. All right, head, body, heart. Right, who's your true self? That is what you want to express, because that is where the authenticity arises. Why? Because it's all energy mechanics. Electric field, magnetic field. That's what it is. It's an electric field and a magnetic field. What we showcase to other people, what other people see, versus the amount of work you'll have to do to scratch the surface into the depths of the person. And all of us have this. Now, the more conscious you are, the higher your ego becomes. The more unconscious you are, the lower your shadow goes. Okay. And as you attain higher light and you get closer to the light, your shadow gets larger. We don't need to push our ego to the high. Okay, so when people are like, let's raise our vibes, let's raise our frequency, what happens? They go through spiritual psychosis. Their ego takes over because their shadow takes over, because it's a reflection. So the higher you go and the lower you go, the more reflection you're going to see. I used to say this all the time as a kid when I was younger. My mom had a lot of like mental issues, and I would say my mom has a high ego but low self-esteem. And I didn't know what that meant at the time, but that's exactly what it is. She had high ego, but she had a low shadow. The higher her ego went, the lower her shadow went, because you can't live up to the expectations you're putting on yourself. Then you feel guilt, shame, remorse, all those other things, and then it comes out in ugly ways. And that's exactly what happens. And a big part of this that people don't talk about when it comes to the self, here's another one, again, here's the ego, then shadow, and then the self is like below it. They've got tons of these different ones. But if you look at it really closely, if you understand toroidal mechanics, then you see exactly what I see. You see energy fields. That's what a lot of this stuff is. It's energy fields. And at the end of the day, these deeper elements of ourself are there to help guide us. Every man has an inner feminine voice, and every woman has an inner masculine voice. And it is not about just listening to those voices. It's about conjoining both aspects into one unified whole. Right? Left and right brain hemisphere. Again, we talked about this yesterday too. Here's another great one, right? Because you've got the ego, you've got all of these axes. This is actually goes even deeper, right? And all these projections too. That's another big part. You've got tons of projections. You've got tons of information that's kind of going on here. And, this is something that I think a lot of people miss. They gloss over this in the real world, archetypes, the image of the self, the symbol of the self. This is like a kind of a big deal when it comes to how we act in public. and how we act with other people. Because at the end of the day, if we don't have a deeper source connection in here, any of these other ones could take over. So you'd rather act like yourself, who you really are, and be yourself in those moments rather than having one of these outer aspects that aren't even you take over. Let's talk about the neurology here for a second, right? So like how does the shadow leak into your life? Self-sabotage, rage outbursts, perfectionism, judgment of others, etc. You see my shadow come out all the time. I get really, and I'm open about this. I'm very open about this. This is how you know somebody's healing, is when they can share this information, and it makes it more practical, right? Everybody loves storytelling. I get angry when the false gurus give bad information. It hurts people, period. That's really it. I don't care who it is. I don't care if they've got 1 million followers or 100 followers. It doesn't matter to me. Like, we have to hold ourselves to a higher level of standard and promote positive, proper information. Because if we promote even the slightest negative information, then you're going to harm somebody, right? Like when I say this stuff, I keep it very kind of high level and vague, and I say, do your own research, do your own work. Don't just listen to me. I say it all the time. When you get online, you tell people you have to just eat fruit or else you're a bad spiritual person. That is so damaging. That's damaging to a lot of people. That's cult mentality, and it's immature. It's immature. It's somebody who hasn't done all the work, and they don't understand that balance is key. So, and again, it's not about diet either, because it's not me saying, it's me saying seek a balanced diet, understand your blood type, understand all this other stuff. I've talked about these things before in the past, in previous videos. So, what are some ways that you can, well, this is actually going to come later, all right, because we've got neuropathy here that we've got to talk about. So, real quick, parts of people who have dark triad traits, psychopaths, crazy people, blah, blah, blah. This is the more advanced stuff. We got like about 8 minutes left. This is the more advanced stuff. These people have diminished cortexes, prefrontal cortexes, meaning they're not consciously using a lot of their mental faculties when it comes to processing information. They just do things purely out of instinct. And there's a couple of ways that this can happen. The ventromedial prefrontal cortex, which is the yellow here, it's also parts of the green and the purplish kind of upper part here. They're larger in those that tend to be more trusting of others compared to those that tend to be less trusting of others. Now, trusting isn't necessarily always a positive thing, right? If you're more trusting of like scam artists, then you're going to get scammed. But really what this is indicating is people who can get along with other people, people who can develop trusting relationships with others. That's really what it means to say. So we've got the prefrontal cortex here. We've also got the amygdala, the Mary Amygdalene. Mary Magdalene had 7 deadly sins within her, and they were released, and then she became a holy woman. It's an analogy, right? And it also looks like a lot of things here. It looks like to some degree the amygdala look like parts of the genitals, like the testicles or ovaries, with this like weird looking Scorpio freaking tail, right? This is the inner part of our brain that we have to study in order to understand the fear factor. This is the secretive fear factor base within our brain, the limbic system, okay? And it's got a bunch of other parts to it. But the limbic system is extremely important, and the amygdala is a major proponent of that. And depending on what you feed the amygdala causes different outcomes. The other thing we have to understand is the HPA axis. This is how our body processes information, and specifically cortisol, as you can see, right? It goes... The feedback loop is it starts with the hypothalamus and the pituitary. It goes down into the adrenal cortex of the kidneys, and then it processes cortisol, and then the feedback comes back up into the brain. This, if unnerved or unwired, can cause what's called cortisol hijacking. And that is where basically the body and mind's, oh, I hit this again, didn't I? The body and mind's inner workings, all right, become disheveled, basically. What happens is the mind freaks out, the body freaks out, you become hyper anxious, the anxiety feeds the brain, and then this becomes a negative feedback loop that feeds into perpetuity. And now what's the result of that? High cortisol. You get a decreased sensitivity to pain, not just physical pain, but also mental pain. So that means that you start to lose synaptic connectivity in the brain, right? And remember, I always like to say those neurons, when they hold hands, they're friends. And when you're holding hands with your friends, you're making better connections and you're learning more things, right? So you want your friends in your brain to hold hands. You want to increase neural connectivity. You don't want to decrease it. Now, everything, if you have too much neural connectivity, sometimes that can also be kind of negative depending on like how big your brain is, I guess. But most of the time, that's a pretty harmless thing to say. You want more interconnectivity within the mind. High cortisol can lead to heart disease, memory and attention issues, high blood pressure, suppressing the immune system, digestive issues, and high blood sugar. Cortisol it's cortisol, really. And I think corti is, it means like opposite or killer or something like that. There's some kind of Latin word. I don't really remember. I wanted to look it up for this video. I should do that right now. But cortisol, it's like the destroyer of the sun, I think is what it is loosely. I'm going to have to look into that. Feel free to correct me in the comments. I don't remember where I heard that long ago, but I think that's what it's supposed to be. It's like the sun destroyer. And it's also produced in the kidneys. The kidneys ruled by Libra. Libra is the Venetian, which is the Luciferian, right? It's all about understanding, and Lucifer not being Satan, right? Lucifer being the fire bearer, right? The fire protector, the light bringer, right? So essentially, you have to have balance. Why? Because what ends up happening in our brains, let me get back to it here. What ends up happening in our brains is that your brain, if you are in childhood and you have a lot of trauma, your brain will have an oversized amygdala and you will be highly anxious. You will start to develop neurological or mental issues, a lot of like PTSD disorders. And what that causes over time is an overlarged amygdala will eventually lead to an inflated, smaller amygdala, because the body will create so much cortisol over many years that it will start to shrink parts of the brain. Okay, and parts of the brain specifically in the limbic system. This can cause people to essentially, through trauma and through all those other negative things, that they can basically lose themselves. They can lose their minds. The opposite is if you don't have enough activation, right? If you're too fearless, if you're too judgmental, right? Where you're just like, I'm better than everybody else. And you don't actually develop those neurological pathways, in which case, then what ends up happening is the parts of your brain that are used for neurological connectivity with trust and love and other people, those get diminished because they're not being used. And instead, other parts of your brain, like the more reptilian parts of your brain, take over. This is what develops into Machiavellian dark triad traits like psychopathy. So you have basically two different outcomes. One is that you have too much fear, and one is that you have too little fear. So and stress, right? So it's fear and stress and a lot of those negative emotions. And what ends up happening is it causes a perpetual feedback loop. So in other words, you have to have just the right amount of low stress and also affinity for caution, right? Like you can't just be like so willy-nilly, right? So here's how we can get through shadow work. So we're right on time with the end of the video. You have to start by getting into the depths of your subconscious mind, your unconscious, your personal unconscious. Journaling is one way to do that, where basically it's not journaling like you're sitting there thinking about journaling. You're just letting your hand free flow and write and letting all the crap come out and go on the page. And if you just get into a flow state, you're actually going to start to feel the anger and a lot of the negative emotion boil up, and then you're going to write a lot of it down. And then if you go back and read it, you'll actually be really surprised at the things that you wrote. And that is kind of peeking into your unconscious a little bit more. The Japanese have a method where they take like sand, they take like a little rake and they like go across sand, or like they'll do it in those big Zen gardens. And that's because it brings the personal unconscious out when you're just focused on doing a repetitive motion. And then you can see how your brain is rippling through. And, if you have like a beautiful Zen garden with the sand and stuff, it was showing the outer reflection of your inner world. So that was like one of those methodologies that they did. Dream analysis, I won't go into that. Emotional triggers as cues, like unmet needs, childhood wounds, and stuff like that. And then the projection mirror exercise. Because remember, this is all about mirror neuropathy, mirror neurons, where basically our brains, I'm just going to let you guys, if you feel like it, you can pause. You already know the tangible benefits from shadow work. Our brains, through neurology, connect on a deeper level, right? So let me see. Yeah, amygdala brain differences. I already talked about a lot of these things here. And let me go here. Okay, so there was, yeah, okay, unintegrated shadow. So scenario one, here we go. The unintegrated shadow, survival mode, repression, denial, disassociation, emotional avoidance, attachment wounds, people pleasing or aggression, perfectionism, reactive behaviors. This makes it so that there's not a lot of mirror neurons if you're in survival mode all the time, because we need those. You're either mirroring people negatively or positively, because we're all reflections of each other, essentially, right? So we're all looking for ourselves in other people. So if you see things that you don't like in other people, that's not all the time, by the way. Sometimes you might just not like somebody. But if you're seeing something in someone else, ask yourself why you don't like that, because it might end up being that you're seeing something in you that you're seeing in other people, right? Amygdala hyperactivation, HPA axis overdrive, et cetera, this causes a lot of issues, right? And then you also have the unintegrated, like emotional coldness. This is manipulation, narcissistic attachment, a lack of guilt and understanding. And this is very common. And what ends up happening is people go through extreme trauma when they're children, and as they get older, they can't even feel guilty. They have absolutely no idea how to even process the emotion, and then they end up hurting other people. And this happens for a lot of like wealthy guys, and I've known some of them, myself. So and then this leads to basically it's either underactivated or overactivated, one or the other, and it causes lots of issues. Now, this is how you integrate the shadow. First of all, you have to have emotional acceptance. So you have to get through a lot of your issues. Authenticity, self-awareness, accountability, compassion, right? Healthy boundaries, balance of masculine and feminine nature, mature emotional expression, individuation, which is a Carl Jung topic. I might make a video on that. Christ consciousness, and coherence. Like that's basically, it's unity. It's unifying the dark and the light version of yourself. Right? This is why people like people who can express their shadow. I would say, maybe not the best example, but I think one of the reasons why he was so popular, Trump, was because he was like going on stage and basically just having his shadow come out, and people were like, yeah, I wish I could do that. It's like, well, you could. you can say whatever you want. You just have to understand the consequences. And then it leads to like microtubule coherence and things like that. Remember, we talked about those microtubules. And it just really, it reshapes your mind. It reshapes the structure and the way of your mind. So you can also over integrate your shadow, okay? Pretending to be healed. So many people do this. They do like a little bit of shadow work and they're like, I'm healed. It's like, no, we're healing throughout our whole lives. You might think that I am completely healed. Don't ever assume that. Nobody's ever completely healed. And nobody. And I mean that. Like I've worked in this field for a very long time. I have tons of clients. Nobody, no matter how much you think, is fully healed. No big guru, no nothing. Okay, we're all working on stuff. And in fact, if you were to ever get to a point where there's nothing to heal, and you were to convince yourself that you've healed everything, that's a big problem. That's a big no-no. But I'm also not going to get gaslit, right? Like I've gone on spiritual retreats where basically the people are like, you need to do more healing, man. It's like, yeah, that's why I'm here. It's like, well, no, you need to do more healing with me and pay me more money. It's like, oh, okay, I see. It's like, no, I'm not going to be gaslit. I know that I've got more work to do. Everybody does, but don't let other people gaslight you too, right? On that topic, if you need to come work with somebody, I do one-on-ones. So anyway, yeah, this is somebody, this is like very popular these days, right? Disassociative positivity. Oh, I love that. It is the, love and light, like it's disassociative. Just love and just pray, everything's going to be great. Meanwhile, their marriage is collapsing on the back end. So there's a lot of this, right? And then the shadow neurology map. The survival shadow becomes overactive, or the cold shadow becomes underactive. And so you have to have balance. You have to have balance and understand, a lot of this stuff, right? So you need the emotional regulation. There was a part. Let me get to it. Okay, here we go. Yeah, I think this was it, right? So I think it was down here. Yeah, unintegrated shadow leads to chronic stress patterns, which leads to limbic dysregulation, which leads to overactive survival networks, which leads to underdeveloped empathy and reflective circuits. An integrated shadow leads to coherent networks, increased vagal tone, heart-brain synchronization, and access to higher states. So in other words, if you can't get the oscillation between the mind and the body. Remember, the body is going to be the key inducer of stress. You have to have your body acclimated properly, right? So if your body's not healthy, but you feel like your mind is healthy and you're struggling, it's probably your body. So you have to have the oscillation between the mind and the body coherent in order to achieve the higher states of frequency that you're desiring, because your body's a temple. It is all one thing. And it's not about raising your vibes, man. We got to raise our vibrations all the way higher and push our egos out of the comfort zone. So then that way we can have our shadow activate when we're not having this mystical experience and we don't learn how to perform magic because we were the chosen one. You see how this works? They really are good at getting you these days. Anyway, I love you guys. Once again, check out the school, working on the shadow work courses. Check out the AI tool if you want a more personalized thing. I'm coming out with the big update today, or at least it should come out later today. I'm still doing some testing, but I love you. I can't wait to see you guys in tomorrow's video. Take care and have a wonderful rest of your day.